In December 1944, a Catholic monsignor from Montana sat at a typewriter and hammered out a prayer for good weather on a 3x5 filing card. Not because he wanted to, because George Patton told him to. 250,000 copies went out that same day, one for every man in Patton's Third Army, tucked into coat pockets alongside ammunition counts and ration schedules. The chaplain had hesitated. Patton had not. What kind of commander asks God for clear skies the way he asks quartermasters for fuel? The kind who had already promised Eisenhower he would pivot an entire army 90 degrees in 3 days and save the besieged 101st at Bastogne through the frozen, mud-covered Ardennes. The kind God might actually answer. At 7 a.m. on December 19, 1944, before anyone at Chef had decided what to do about the Ardennes, George Patton gathered his staff in Luxembourg and dictated 3 contingency plans. Each one assumed the Germans would break through. Each one ended with Third Corps turning north. He assigned a code phrase to each plan and left the trigger with his chief of staff, Hugh Gaffey. If the call came, Gaffey would not convene a meeting. He would start engines. 3 hours later, Patton stood in a cold stone barracks in Verdun and told Eisenhower he could attack on December 22nd. The room went quiet. Bradley, sitting nearby, later admitted he thought Patton was bluffing. The math alone seemed impossible. Patton's Third Army was facing east along the Saar, fully engaged, its supply lines running in the wrong direction. To pivot north meant pulling roughly 100,000 men off one axis and throwing them onto another, across frozen roads already clogged with retreating First Army units, abandoned trucks, and Belgian civilians trying to get south before the Germans got there first. Patton gave no reservations and requested no delay. By the time Eisenhower gave his approval, the convoys were already in motion, as the pivot began that very night. Columns that had been pointed at the Siegfried Line at dawn were grinding north by dark. Military police worked intersections in the snow, waving units through, while stragglers from the 28th and 106th Infantry Divisions stumbled past in the opposite direction, some of them without weapons, most of them without orders. Fuel became the first crisis. The Third Army's depots were stacked east, toward the Saar. Now the army was moving north, and the fuel had to follow. Tanker trucks were rerouted mid-delivery, drivers pulling off one road and onto another with nothing but a grid reference scrawled on a clipboard. Some convoys drove through the night without headlights, navigating by the sound of the column ahead. Units covered close to 70 miles in a single push, then rolled straight into assembly areas where they were told to prepare for an attack they had not yet been briefed on. Artillery battalions were reassigned while still in transit. Engineers received bridge coordinates for crossings they had never seen. Patton watched the chaos and let it run. He knew that waiting for an order meant waiting too long. By December 20th, the shape of the advance had begun to harden. Third Corps concentrated around Ardennes, just south of the Belgian border. The 4th Armored Division, under Gaffey, formed the tip. The 26th and 80th Infantry Divisions filled in the flanks. Every road heading north became a funnel, and every hour lost to a breakdown or a wrong turn compressed the timetable further. That same day, the Germans sealed Bastogne. Patton understood the implications faster than most of his commanders. The 101st Airborne and fragments of several other units were now surrounded. They had limited ammunition, almost no resupply, and no way out. The town had become a clock. Every hour the garrison held gave Patton's columns another hour to close the distance. If Bastogne fell before he got there, the entire German salient would have a clear road west, and the offensive that Schaff still half hoped might burn itself out would instead accelerate. The order to the garrison was simple: hold at all costs. The unspoken second half of that sentence was, because we are not close yet. At 6 a.m. on December 22nd, Patton's attack went in. The 4th Armoured pushed toward Martelange and the Sûre River crossing. Within the first hours, the advance stalled. The Germans had dropped every bridge along the approach. Engineers scrambled forward under mortar and small arms fire to throw up replacements, while tanks idled in single-file columns behind them, burning fuel, burning time. When the crossings finally opened, the columns surged forward and ran straight into prepared positions. Panthers and towed anti-tank guns covered the approach roads from elevated ground. The Shermans had to stop, deploy, and fight through each position individually. Patton responded by pushing his M4A3E2 jumbos, the up-armored Shermans with their thicker hides, to the front of the column. A practical fix made on the move. The jumbos could take hits that would gut a standard Sherman, and that bought the rest of the formation room to maneuver. Inside Bastogne, the cost of every lost hour landed directly on the garrison. By midday, on the 22nd, some artillery batteries were down to fewer than 10 rounds per gun. Fire missions were rationed so tightly that entire German probing attacks went unanswered because there was simply nothing left to shoot. Medics worked with whatever they could scrounge. Surgical teams operated in basements by flashlight. At 11:30 a.m. that morning, German officers approached the American perimeter under a white flag. They carried a typed ultimatum demanding surrender. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe read it, laughed, and said, "Oh, nuts." His written reply was one word: nuts. The story traveled fast. It became legend almost immediately. But McAuliffe's defiance did not change what was happening on the ground. The garrison was running out of everything that mattered, and the relief column was still fighting through a country that gave nothing away for free. Frustrated by how the weather was ruining his plans, Patton had picked up the phone and called his chief chaplain, Colonel James H. O'Neill. Patton asked, "Do you have a good prayer for weather? We must do something about those rains if we are to win the war." O'Neill, a Catholic monsignor from Montana who had been in the Army chaplain service since 1926, searched his prayer books and found nothing suitable. So he sat down and typed one himself on a 3x5 filing card. When he brought it to Patton, the general read it, nodded, and told him to print 250,000 copies, one for every man in the Third Army. O'Neill, startled by the number, added a Christmas greeting from Patton on the reverse side. The cards went out immediately. O'Neill had hesitated briefly when Patton first made the request. He pointed out that praying for clear weather so men could kill other men more efficiently was not exactly standard practice among the clergy. Patton cut him off. "Chaplain, are you trying to teach me theology, or are you the chaplain of the Third Army? I want a prayer." He got one, and he meant it. Patton saw prayer the way he saw logistics or intelligence. A resource that could be brought to bear on a problem, he told O'Neill. "If we all pray, it will be like plugging in on a current whose source is in heaven. I believe that prayer completes that circuit. It is power." Whether the Almighty was listening or a stagnant, high-pressure system finally moved, the sky over the Ardennes cleared on the morning of December 23rd. Patton noticed. So did every pilot in the Allied air forces. Fighter bombers that had been grounded for days were over the battlefield within hours. P-47 Thunderbolts hit German positions ahead of Third Corps, struck road junctions and supply columns, and forced the enemy to disperse. The coherence of the German defense, which had slowed the 4th Armored to a crawl, began to loosen. The fighting over the next 2 days collapsed into a series of village battles. Each name on the map represented another cluster of stone houses turned into strongpoints. another set of tree lines hiding machine gun nests, another crossroads that had to be taken before the column could move again. Patton's staff later calculated that from December 22nd to December 25th, the advance covered roughly 16 miles under fire. Now every yard cost something. Logistics frayed. Fuel trucks struggled to keep pace on roads that were still jammed and still under occasional interdiction fire. Units outran their artillery support and had to wait, exposed, while the guns caught up. Replacements arrived at the front with almost no combat training, sometimes fewer than 2 weeks out of a depot in England. Patton accepted every one of these problems because the alternative was worse. Slowing down meant giving the Germans time to reinforce the ring around Bastogne. Inside the perimeter, C-47 transports dropped hundreds of tons of supplies on December 23rd and 24th. Parachutes filled the sky over the town, and men sprinted across open ground to drag bundles back to their positions. The drops stabilized the ammunition situation, but Bastogne remained surrounded. Christmas morning, clear sky, hard cold. Patton noted the weather in his diary and kept pushing. His columns closed on the last belt of German resistance near the village of Eisenhower, 5 miles south of Bastogne. The Germans knew what was coming. The final miles would be the hardest. The strain on Patton's force had become visible everywhere. Momentum held the whole thing together, but the columns kept moving because stopping at this point would have been harder than continuing. On December 26th, the Combat Command Reserve of the 4th Armored Division made the final push. The road to Bastogne narrowed through Eisenhower under fire from both flanks. Lieutenant Charles Boggess, commanding the lead tank, drove straight through the village without stopping, his Sherman taking hits that scarred the hull, but failed to penetrate. Behind him, infantry cleared the buildings in close fighting while the rest of the column pressed through the gap. At 4:45 p.m., Boggess's tank reached the 101st Airborne's perimeter. That night, trucks loaded with ammunition and fuel rolled into Bastogne for the first time in a week. Ambulances rolled out carrying men who had waited days for evacuation. 7 days had passed since Patton gave his answer at Verdun. His Third Army had reversed direction, covered more than 100 miles, and cracked open a corridor at the exact moment the garrison's hold was beginning to slip. That night, Patton called O'Neill into his office. "Chaplain, you're the most popular man in this headquarters. You sure stand in good with the Lord and soldiers." Then he pinned a bronze star on him. O'Neill became the only man in World War II to receive a medal for writing a prayer.